Hi, this is My Keys to Music and I'm Mark LaRochelle. This is part 2 of the comparison video regarding the Nord Stage 3 keyboard and the Nord Electro 5D. Alright, a quick agenda before we get started. In this video we're going to talk about the system. And by the way, I encourage you to watch part 1 as well if you haven't already, so that you can get an idea for the foundation of all this. Although it's not absolutely required that you watch part 1 in order. First we're going to talk about the boot time of these two keyboards. It doesn't take that long, but it's an interesting thing nonetheless. Sound generators comparison, we're going to talk about, the piano, the organ, the synth, and so forth, and how those compare between the two keyboards. We're going to talk a lot, spend a lot of time on layers, panels, and splits. This is by far the most robust area of the two keyboards. It's one that can sometimes be the most confusing, and it's worth diving deep on that to compare the two keyboards. We'll talk briefly about the programs that each of the keyboards have, and a little bit about the live and autosave settings as well. All right, without further ado, let's go ahead and compare those boot times. Okay, it looks like 14 seconds for the Stage 3 and 17 seconds for the Electro 5. Okay, let's talk about layers and splits. Let's start with the Electro because that's a little easier to start with. And here I've got pictured a Nord Electro 5D, and it's comprised of a part lower, or a lower part, but on the keyboard it's called part lower. And there's 3 sound engines: organ, piano, and synth. There's also a part upper with organ, piano, and synth. In between, there's a keybed split button, which allows you to split between the parts. But first, let's talk about layers. And layers is the idea of layering 2 parts at the same time, simultaneously on top of each other, so that when you press the keyboards, both sounds are played. So I'm going to put lower on the part lower, the organ, and that will play across the entire range of the keyboard. Let's not get confused. Just because it says lower part doesn't mean it somehow plays on the lower part of the keyboard. It only does that if the split button is invoked, and right now we don't have the split button involved. So organ, then I'm going to layer on top of that, on the upper part, the piano. Both will be heard at the same exact time when any key is pressed on the keyboard, provided the keybed split button is not clicked. All right, now to mix the volume between the two, you have a simple knob called part mix, and if I turn it to the left, it'll be more favoring the lower part. If I turn it towards the right, it'll favor the upper part. So it's a great overall easy way to handle this. And I just want to say for the record, when we go to the Stage 3, we're going to be able to layer a lot more than just the 2 parts here. So I just want to let you know that if you haven't bought your keyboard yet, that even with just these 2 layers alone, you're going to have a tremendous functionality and a great sound. To be able to layer both a piano and an organ simultaneously is really huge. It really is like having 2 independent keyboards on top of each other. So, and in a live performance, pretty much it'll get the job done. So don't feel like if you're getting the Electro and it only has 2 parts that can be layered, don't feel like you're really being totally shortchanged, because you can do a lot with those 2 parts. Likewise, you have the capability of doing an octave shift on each part. So you could put the piano a couple of octaves down lower, minus 1 or minus 2. And then you could put the piano a couple of octaves higher. So you could really have a lot of variety between those 2 parts in terms of getting that whole keyboard range. In addition to the octave shift per part, you can have options for the sustain pedal on or off, or the control pedal on or off. So those are some nice features that where the Nord Electro 5 gives you, some nice options. Now let's talk about splitting this. Let's go ahead and take away that. And now I'm going to click the keybed split button. What happens? Okay, well, first you have to realize that the Nord Electro 5 can be split in one of 6 different areas. So there's 6 potential areas where you can split it, but you can only split it one time. So in this case, I went ahead and split the bottom part here. And if I were to have the organ part and have this split invoked, this is what it would sound like. You'd have the organ playing in the lower part here and the piano on the upper part. If I do the part mix, I will literally change the volume between the two. So I can mix the two just like I did in the layer scenario, but in fact, this is the split scenario. So here you would only hear the organ if you played from this key down, and you'd only hear the piano if you played from that key up. So that's what the Nord Electro 5 can do, and it's a great keyboard for performing, especially if you play keyboard bass. It's great having the bass part in the left hand and whatever part you want in the right hand. Okay, let me set my keyboard. I'm going to go up a program, down a program. That kind of clears the deck of anything that I might have had before it. On this particular program, I have some delay, so I'm going to take that off. And then I'm going to actually shut the two sound engines, the lower and the upper. Let me zoom in so you can see that. So I've actually turned off the lower part and the upper part. I'm also going to deselect the split. So now I've got really no sound engine happening. And as I click the keys, or as I press the keys, you don't hear any sound. Okay, let's go ahead and put on the lower part, piano. Now, notice I double click to select those as one option, or I could hold the shift button and do it that way. Okay, so I've got piano invoked, and let's go ahead and no matter what key I push, it's going to be piano. Even though it's the lower part, it's going to have the piano play throughout the keyboard range. Okay, so, well, that's interesting. Then why would I have a lower part and an upper part? Let's go ahead and put the piano on the upper part. Same exact thing. Okay, well, does it make sense? I mean, shouldn't I have one piano playing? Well, the reason that happens is because you actually have two separate sound engines, if you will, or sound generators. They're called parts, part lower, part upper. And I can use that to layer the sounds. So let me give you an example of layering the sounds, and then I'll show you a neat example of where I actually can put piano against piano in one certain condition. So I'll go ahead and put organ on the left and piano on the right. All right, so that is, so long as I don't have my split button invoked, I hear both piano and organ at the same time. I can mix them. I can put just the lower part, which would be organ, and then mix it all the way to the right, which would be just piano. Okay, so that's how you can mix, and that's called a layer. So the three combinations of layers are organ and piano, organ and synth, piano and synth. Now, it doesn't have to be organ on the left each time. You can flip-flop them. But those are the only three combinations of actual layered sounds where you're going to hear two distinct sound engines at the same time throughout the entire keyboard. That's the only combination you can have. Okay, now once you talk about the split button, then the game changes a little bit. So let's take that same layered sound, which is organ and piano, and this time just add the split to it. What happens then? Okay, I'm going to move my split point a little closer here in the middle of the keyboard. So there's my split point. So at this point, you should hear organ on the left and piano on the right, which you do. So that's how you split the keyboard. There are a total of 6 split points on the Nord Electro 5D, and you can play 2 splits at the same time. In other words, you can have a lower part and an upper part. And so you can split the keyboard once at one of 6 places. Perfect. Now, there's another condition where you might say, well, can I layer 2 synths at the same time so that I can hear, let's say, a string sample along with a bell sample or something like that? And the truth is you can't layer 2 of the same sound in any combination at the same time. There is one thing that you can do, though, when you use the same sound engine at the same time, and under one condition you can get away with that, which is I can have piano on the left. Now notice I'll take my split key off and I'll show you what I mean. And I try to do piano on the right and I just get a blinking light, which means I can't, under this condition, I can't have piano against piano. But if I split the keyboard, now I can have piano on piano. You say, okay, well, does that give me 2 different pianos? Can I have a grand layered with an upright? And you can't. You cannot do that sort of thing with the Nord Electro 5D. But what you can do when you have the split button and piano on piano is that you can then utilize some of these other options, which is like the sustain pedal. So you could take off the sustain pedal on the lower part of the piano, and on the upper part, leave the sustain pedal. So only sustaining the upper part of the keyboard, split at whatever point you decide you want to split it. So that's one example. And then another, and probably a better example, is all these effects here. Notice how they have a low or an up, which means that if I wanted this effect on the upper part of the keyboard, I could do that and have piano be the primary sound, but have the effects only on one part or the other. So maybe a great way to see that is I'll go ahead and put a delay, a strong delay on the upper part of the keyboard. Notice my keyboard is still split. I've got piano on piano. At this point, here's my split point. So if I play on the left side of the keyboard or the lower part, there is no delay. On the right side or the upper part, now I have a delay. So doing this keyboard split, piano on piano or organ on organ or synth on synth, you can take advantage of the distinct effects that affect one split part or the other. But you cannot layer two pianos, two synths, and two organs at the same time. You can only use them in those distinct combinations I mentioned earlier. So I hope that clears up the layering and split capabilities of the Nord Electro 5D. All right, now let's talk about the stage. This definitely takes it a step further, and it works a little differently. Here's the stage 3. This happens to be the 76 key pictured. Now the stage works differently. The volume is controlled at the actual sound engine itself, and you get 3 independent sound engines, and then on top of that you get panels. So these 3 working together is a single panel configuration. So I've got organ, piano, and synth, and this is where I would adjust the piano, organ, or synth volume in the mix. So each of these has an independent volume. So if I were to turn the organ on, I would hear the entire organ through the whole range. Piano, same way, and synth there. So now I've layered 3 independent sound engines on top of each other, all playing simultaneously. This provides for an amazingly thick sound. If you have the sounds and the program set up a certain way, you can really have a lot of nice functionality here. And that's panel A. So if that weren't enough, here comes panel B with a completely new configuration with the same organ, piano, and synth sound generators. And if I were to turn the organ on piano B, and assuming I had both panel A and B playing simultaneously, which is an option on the stage 3, I could in fact have 6 layered sounds. It's like having 6 keyboards at your disposal here with the stage 3. Now, if you're going to play all 6 layers at the same time, you are potentially going to lose some polyphony. As you start playing more and more keys, some may drop off, especially if you have the sustain pedal. So I'm not going to lie to you, you could easily max out the stage 3 if you go hog wild and have all 6 of these playing and you are jamming on it. And chances are you wouldn't necessarily want all 6 of these playing at the same time, unless you've got some really light, well-mixed sounds all working together. But at the very least, you can turn panel A on independent of B, and then turn B on independent of A, and then switch back and forth very quickly between completely two different setups. It's a really great flexibility feature. You could put the bridge part of the song on panel B, and you could put the chorus part of the song on panel A, for example. All right, so that's great. That's layers. In addition, you have octave shift options for every sound engine, so you have up to 6 different options there in terms of where you place the keyboard parts for the different sound engines. And you have independent control over the sustain pedal and the pitch stick per engine as well. So it's huge options. I mean, if you ever wanted to pitch bend your piano, which is kind of a crazy thing to do, at least for a traditional piano, you can do that. It probably sounds a little better with the electric piano. So nice options there. And then on top of that, you have a feature called Morph, which is now that introduces the control pedal, which you saw in the Electro 5 slide earlier. The control pedal is handled here under the Morph section. And the way that this works is you can assign the control panel to control any number, any 1 or all 6 if you want, volume and different things, all being controlled by the control pedal Morph button. Likewise, you can do that with Aftertouch and the wheel. So just a crazy amount of options here on the layering. Okay, in this example, I'm going to turn only one panel on at a time. I'm going to start with panel A. I'll turn off all my sound generators, my sound engines, and I'll go ahead and we'll start with the organ. Got like a B3. Okay, then I'll turn that off just for a second and then add some piano. That's what that sounds like. And then the synth. So we'll put all 3 of those as a layer, all on panel A. You should be able to hear all of those together. You can adjust the volume a little bit. There, I can definitely hear the organ this time. Add more piano. pretty much hear them all. Okay, now let's set up panel B to play independent for the moment. Okay, we'll go with organ, like a Farfisa organ. Easy to distinguish that. Then here we'll do a different type of piano, maybe a DX7. Okay, and then the synth, kind of like a theremin meets saw wave type of thing going on. So all three of those together on panel B. Can pretty much hear all of that. Take this down, put that up all the way. Now, push both buttons. Both A and B will be heard at the same time for a 6-layer composition. Now, I can switch to panel B to show me what that is. I happen to have it already on panel B. Switch to panel A and it'll show me what that is. But the fact that these are both illuminated, even though one's blinking, the blinking one is the one that has the dominant one, the one you're able to see right away. That becomes now the dominant one, but they're both being heard at the same time. So the stage 3 can easily layer 6 independent sound engines at the same time. Okay, now let's talk about how to split. Let's take this yet another step further and talk about splits. The stage 3 has tremendous split capability, a total of 10 different split points options. Those are split point options you have. 10 is just crazy to even think about. And then you can split it once, twice, or 3 times. I'm going to go ahead and split this 3 times. That's the full Monty. Now, if I split it 3 times, I get 4 zones. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those 4 zones are represented by the lights up here. So let's go ahead and turn on the organ, but turn on the organ on all 4 zones. So you would hear the organ across the entire keyboard. I'm going to go ahead and turn on piano on panel A, just 2, 3, and 4, zones 3 and 4, and that's where I'd hear my piano from this key on up. The synth I'm going to turn on keyboard zone 1 and 2. I would hear the synth in this part of the keyboard. So that's some pretty powerful stuff right there, just on panel A. Now, when I invoke panel B at the same time, my split points don't change, and I cannot have different split points between the panels. But still a tremendous amount of power because I can still designate what the sound engines and where they're going to be placed on the zone. So let's take this and look at panel B for organ on zone 2 and 3, and that's going to place the sound right in the middle of the keyboard. And then just for the heck of it, let's go ahead and put the piano on 2, 3, and 4. All right, and let's go ahead and put the synth on the first zone, just zone 1 here. And you can see this is just a great number of combinations. It's almost unlimited in the number of combinations you can have once you introduce up to 3 splits. Tremendous features. Again, the octave shift buttons would play a part in that, and these would control those sound generators that way. And then I haven't talked about it yet, but the stage 3 has an extra option which is easily accessible through the front panel, which is called external, and you can control an external MIDI source also by zone, also independent by panel. So this gives you yet a whole nother variety of things you can do with the stage 3 in terms of its ability to be a great controller keyboard as well as a performance keyboard in and of itself. And then of course the morph feature, and the morphs are independent by panel as well, which I didn't mention on the previous slide, but they are independently controlled by panel. Okay, now let's split the keyboard. I've got just panel A on, and you'll notice that all sound generators, when the keyboard is not split, have all 4 lights illuminated, all 4 zones illuminated, because naturally if you're not splitting the keyboard, all the sounds are going to be heard, just like we saw in the layered example. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on the split, and I decided to split it into 3 different parts, so 3 splits making a total of 4 zones. Zone 1, Zone 2, Zone 3, Zone 4. These are the lights indicating where the split is on the keyboard. Okay, on the organ engine, we can see that I've got it set so that only the left or the first zone should have organ. Sure enough, I have organ on the left zone. Then you can see I've set the piano to be the middle 2 zones, so zone 2 and 3. So organ, piano, through that zone, through that zone, and should be not here in this zone. Nothing there in that zone. The synth I have just on zone 4, which is from here on out. Sure enough. Okay, so I can also have panel B set up. Now, once I split the keyboard, that does apply to both panel A and B simultaneously, and the split points are going to be the same between panel A and B. So the split is common across both panel A and B, but the sounds, of course, and the way that those sounds are split can be totally independent. So, for example, in panel A, I had my organ just on zone 1, but in panel B, I have my organ on zone 1 and 2. So there's the Farfisa organ on zone 1 through zone 2. And then nothing except the piano on zone 3 and 4. 3 and 4. Then we introduce the synth here on zone 4. So piano is 3 and 4, synth is zone 4. And yes, I can combine both panels, and then you can hear the different combinations. So tremendous flexibility there. The only other thing to note that the Stage 3 has that the Electro doesn't in terms of splitting, besides the fact that it has 3 split points instead of 1, is the fact that you can do crossfading. So let's just put panel A on by itself so you get an idea. So I'm going to go ahead, and there's my organ on the left, and it goes abruptly into my piano in zone 2 and 3. So if I hold this button here and then go to the second part of this panel here on the OLED display, I can go ahead and set up a small or a large crossfade between zones 1 and 2. So let's see what that sounds like. This should now have my organ bleeding into my piano and vice versa. You can still hear the organ as the piano takes over and becomes the dominant within that zone. And so forth. So we can then crossfade here on the high part. There's a large crossfade. I can still hear the piano. You can prove it by turning this off. It eventually fades off. And likewise, if I had the synth, you can hear the synth fade off. So this crossfade really presents a nice way to blend the splits when you have 2 distinct sounds and you don't necessarily want them to have abrupt cutoff. Now let's compare the programs. The programs are settings for how the sounds are configured. So think of the program as when you change from one program to another, you're going to get a whole series of different sounds and effect settings and what have you. It basically controls the entire setup for a single program. These are very similar between the 2 keyboards. They're named slightly different, but they're almost identical in the way that they work. On the Nord Electro, they're called sound banks, and they're numbered 1 through 8 on the Stage. They're also called sound banks, but they're lettered A through H, which also happens to be 8. Within that, you can have 50 different programs within each bank, giving you a total of 400 programs that to choose from. So that's quite a bit. It's quite a bit of variety that's built in. An interesting tidbit, which is not really talked about too much, I don't think, is that the Nord Electro comes pre-programmed from the factory with 200 already stored for you, with leaving you 200 empty. The Stage 3 actually gives you 300 pre-programmed from the factory with 100 left empty. So that's a little tidbit there. All right, one last look here at the live and auto-save slots. The live settings for the Nord Electro, they give you up to 3 slots, and the Nord Stage, you have 5 slots. And really, the special thing about the live buttons are when you have a live button and you make a change to your keyboard, it's saved for you without you actually having to click store and go through the extra effort of saving and assigning that sound. Anything you do within the live setting is saved, and it's even saved, I believe, even through power off and power on. So it's kind of a nifty way to, if you're doing if you have a great sound that you always use, but you wanted to change the EQ just for this gig, you could save that in the live setting and then have that for the whole night on 1, 2, 3, what have you. All right, let's take a look at the song and set lists. On the Nord Electro, it's called set list. On the Nord stage, it's called songs. And I think there's a reason why they renamed it, but let me see if I can explain this. On the Nord Electro, you have basically 4 set lists, and each set list can have 50 different songs. On the Nord stage, you have 8 set lists, they call them, or song lists. And then within each song setting, you have 5 different song parts. So if, let's just say you're on song 1, and song 1 is dominated by piano, you could have 5 different pianos within that song that you can choose from, and the Nord Stage 3 will store all that for you. So it's a nice little added feature, those song parts. Like I said, each set can hold 50, giving you a total of 200 storage locations for your set song lists. All right. And 400 storage locations for the stage. Good. Thanks for watching part 2. Part 3 is underway, or will be in a week or 2, and we'll continue on this deep dive exploring the difference between these 2 keyboards. If you haven't already done so, watch part 1, and subscribe if you like this content and want more of it. Thanks.